Hello everyone, I am Wanjiru Koinange and welcome to A Palace for the People Live.
And I'm Angela Wachuka. And for those that don't know, our podcast, A Palace for the People, is a documentary-style podcast focusing on history.
And this is season 3 of our beloved podcast. And this season is all about protest. We have episodes about student protests, about boarding school protests, farmers protesting against big agricultural companies. We have episodes about feminist protests, the church and protests. We even go back and explore Kenya's first labor strikes.
And we're very pleased to be joined this morning by Keith Angana. Asante sana for saying yes.
So hi everyone. My name is Keith Angana and I am very much excited to be part of this. I'm looking forward to share all the insights that I have with regards to the protest, especially concerning the history, because that's my strongest forte.
Indeed. Thank you, Keith. We're really happy to have you. So if you guys don't know, I'm causing a bit of a generational thing here because Keith is a writer, he's an editor, he's a cultural organizer, and he's also one of the founders of Kwani. And Kwani with a Q, actually, I have to say this, Kwani with a Q. But Wachuka, my co-founder, was one of the executive director at Kwani with a K. And I'd like to say that there's definitely some inspiration here that I'm happy to be sitting in the midst. He's also an incredible organizer. He is the founder of Bunge la Mayut. And for the guests in the audience, Bunge la Mayut would directly translate into Parliament for Young People, the Youth Parliament. And we're going to start with a question for Keith, and one that we will invite you to reflect on later in the podcast. So Keith, where were you on June 25th, 2024, so last year?
So June 25th was the third day of the active protests, which started initially on June 18th, and then there was June 20th, and then by that time it had been established that the protest will be on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so the next Tuesday was on June 25th, and of course I left home at around 10 a.m. and headed to town. And there I had already planned with my friends that we would meet around Kenyatta Avenue. So I made my way from Archives to GPO, and by the time I got there, which was around 12, the protest had already started. So tear gas was already being thrown around. There were already the water trucks that were splashing water all around. So I think this time the protests were a bit stronger in terms of the number of people who were as compared to June 20th. And it was very, I was very excited to see all the people who had come out to the streets. There was a very huge number, and I was really happy. When it got to around 2 p.m., I think that's the time when all the people overpowered the police, and now they made their way to the parliament. So from where we were, together with my friends, we started, because one of them was online on Twitter, and he was following up on the updates on what was happening. And so he told us that people have made their way into the parliament. When we were just checking up, it was a live stream from Citizen, we were just checking up what exactly, like how the proceedings, and I was excited that because I didn't know that there would be casualties. There was just the adrenaline was so much in everybody, and I can remember that everybody was excited for this moment, and we tried also to make our way now after that was happening. But then when we got to I think it was Holy Family Basilica, that's when we started seeing casualties streaming in, and we decided to now go back.
As you were speaking, talking about your friends and kind of navigating, I couldn't help wonder what protest means to you politically. I think I have a sense, but personally as well.
So to me, protest means an act of revolt against a particular thing. So the first ever time I was involved in a protest was in high school, back when I was in Form 2. So one of the school captains had slapped a student, and now the student had been rushed to hospital because it was a serious injury and the student was sick. And now most of us decided to mobilize and to go on strike to make a statement that the school captain should be disbanded first of all and should be chased away from the school. So we just decided on a random day, on a random morning at 11 a.m. we decided that the whole block, the Form 2 block, that we will just walk out of the school together. So once again, the reason for that was that because we were against what was happening, because the school captains, if you can remember well how bullying was rampant in high school, and this was something that was even accepted by the school administration. So we decided to revolt against the existing system, and even pushing forward to now how it is with last year. So we were aware of how the government was treating us. We were aware of the bills that the government was pushing to us. And so we decided to come out last year in revolt of the finance bill.
When you folks start listening to this season, and I think something to point out is that whereas with earlier seasons, Shiro and I have been the main voices on the podcast. And we're very, very happy for this season, season 3, to actually kind of be intros and outros, because our fantastic team of interns who are doing all the research that you're seeing exhibited here kind of picked out protests that they wanted to cover. So when you listen to the first episode, you will hear that it's about a protest in a boarding school, which you just referenced. And Kenya, of course, has a long history of protests, from the Kenya Land and Freedom Army to Saba Saba, which is exhibited here. Are there connections over time between these protests, do you think?
So the connection that I tried to make, especially, actually, the first ever protest that was recorded in Kenya happened in 1892 when Wayaki Wahinga was captured by the IBAC, or the Imperial British East Africa Corporation, and he was stationed at at the time it was called the Fort Smith, but currently it's exactly where the Kabete police station is. So he had been jailed because he had refused to cede the land to the British, to the IBAC at the time. And the interesting thing is that it is quite similar to the Albert Ojwang incident, because when he was captured, he was tied to a flag post at the police station, and then he was beaten up by the captain. The captain, the head of the Fort Smith at the time, was called Captain Parkes. So he was beaten up till close. He was almost dead. The other members of his family and his friends decided to come out to the station and to protest against that, to demand for his release. But then what the Ibiako Askaris did at the time is that they took him out through another side, and then they placed him on top of a caravan, and then he was taken away to Kibwezi, where he died eventually. But then there's some mystery on whether he died at the police station or whether he died when he got to Kibwezi. And the thing is that it's similar to Albert Ojwang, because both of them were mistreated at the police station, and then the government died about that. And also, again, some 30 years later, we see the Harry Thuku and the Muthoni Nyanjiru incident, whereby he was locked in Central Police, and then Muthoni Nyanjiru organized or mobilized some 8,000 people to come and demand for his release. And then again, there were some shootings, and then people died. And then we move on again to the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, where they're fighting for the release. So the thing, even when you come to the university protests after independence, when you come to the KPU protests, when you come to the farmers, to the dock workers, to the doctors. So the thing is, in all these situations, the government turns out to be the oppressors. In each and every one of them, the government is usually on the wrong side. The government is the one which is just having some repressive policies against the people. So it's easier to connect that 130 years later, the government is the one that's having bad policies against the people. So that's how we can link this movement. That's how we can live.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think to follow up from that, you've written about how Gen Zs have come to claim their political voice in this moment. When we were preparing for this conversation, we were talking about the, Kwani with a Q, Kwani with a K, and the kind of different age sets that we come from. We've got 2 decades between you and I, right? And I'm just curious whether these protests for you at your age feel different. Does this feel like a new form of kind of political consciousness? Or do you feel like it's an old fight with new tools for your generation?
So I think one of the main reasons why this protest came as a surprise to everybody is because now, following the 22 elections, most of the people consider the Gen Z to be quite apathetic, that they don't really care about what the government, that they're not really involved in politics. But then all of a sudden last year, now they started becoming politically active, they started becoming politically conscious. And so that might be one of the things that surprised people. But in terms of the use of protests among the young people, because I've done a lot of research on the university politics from the 1970s, especially at the University of Nairobi, when it was opened in 1969, and 20 years later, up to 1989, they had 20 strikes. That was like one strike every year. And I think this is a tool that has been used numerous times, especially even amongst the youth. And the thing about young people is that they have a lot of energy, so it's easier for them to be radical. They have a lot of time on their hands too. And so I think this is a tool that has existed over time. And the thing is, because I think one of the things that most of the Gen Z are saying when you hear them talk, when you hear them make TikToks, is that they're not really different. They're trying to be different from their parents. But I think this is something that has been used as a tool over time. Like all the previous generations have been having protests in opposition to things. But the only thing that is new for the Gen Zs is that this is the first time they're having a political awakening.
Speaking of age and tools, so Keith, you're in your early 20s. And as we'll tell over here, we've been protesting for a while, you just said so. And a lot of these protests happened before the internet. So can you imagine what protesting would be like or was before the internet?
So the thing about the internet is that it has enabled us to mobilize easier. For example, I first heard about the June 18th protests on Twitter because someone shared a poster about it and people started retweeting it, and then it was shared amongst many people. But now I wouldn't imagine. I think it will be very hard to mobilize before the internet, because even when you look at most of the underground groups, like they used to share information just secretly, and if you're not a member of them, you wouldn't have known about it. So I think before the internet, it must have been very hard to mobilize. But then on the other side, I think one thing about organizing or mobilizing through the internet is that, of course, it's easier for maybe the security agents to see what is happening.
So you listened to season 3 of the podcast. We did speak to some people who are mobilizing before the internet. But for today, if you're in the audience and you are one of these guys, these geniuses who are gathering before internet, tell us how you were doing it. We'll tell Keith. Keith, could you tell us about Bunge la Mayut, why you set it up, what it does, all the strands of its work?
Okay, so after the Finance Bill 2024 was first shared in last year, I think it was around either late April or early May. So there was a lot of anger on the internet because most of the people were just reading the bills and then they were wondering how the government plans to tax them more, yet the economy isn't growing. So I realized about how most of the anger on the internet was palpable, and then I thought of how just to give people a forum to be able to share all these sentiments in person, because I usually believe that it's easier to communicate to people. It's easier to just have a discussion in person than online, than on Twitter, because of that. So I decided to now create a forum, but then I thought hard about whether it will just be a person in front delivering a sermon or delivering a lecture, breaking down what exactly it is. But then I realized that that wouldn't involve each and every person in the audience. So I decided now to involve each and every person. I thought we could take the parliamentary model, because the parliamentary model usually has the side of the opposition and the side of the government. And then when a bill is being proposed in parliament, both sides have a chance to present their views on it. And so that was the first ever model we thought of for the Bunge la Mayut. So because we studied the finance bill, we decided now that each and every person who's attending it should read all the bills or should read whatever it interests them, and then they should come up with an argument for it. They should come up, for example, if it's the eco levy, you should come up with an argument on whether it should be implemented or whether it shouldn't be. And so we had a very huge side of the people who now decided to act on behalf of the government. And then it was now when they were presenting it, because of course defending some government policies is very hard because some of them are just outrightly don't make sense. And so you have to read through the bill. You have to think about possibly a logic or research on the background, and now come up with a way to deliver it sarcastically. But now when with that kind of delivery, it's easier for most of the people to understand. And if each and every person, almost all the people in the audience, have a particular clause in the bill that they were arguing about, it was easier for everybody to know what was in the bill during one session. So we used to have those sessions. Similarly, it was once every 2 weeks. And we had the members of the opposition and we had the members of the proposition. So, of course, for the opposition, it was easier because everybody is usually against the government. So it's easier to just have your reasons why you're against a particular thing. But for the members who are on the side of the government, you had to read the particular clause. You had to look deeply into why this particular thing is being implemented. For example, the eco levy, which was a new tax being introduced on plastic products like diapers. You had to look deeply into what is the consumption of plastics in the country. A bill like the one that was introduced, the digital tax on 15%. You had to look at the statistics on the number of content creators around the country and now have an argument on why the government should introduce that. And so that forum enabled an easier or seamless breakdown of the whole finance bill.
Thank you. And coming back to you and sort of forms of protest, what do you think are some of the less visible forms of protest outside of marches and hashtags? The opening of LitFest I made a reference to something that happened in the publishing space when we were documenting the post-election violence at Kwani with a K. And the editor at the time, Billy Kahora, had written this really passionate editorial for Kwani. What issue was it? Kwani 5, yes, the twin issue for Kwani and Part 2, that's right. And it was an editorial that was asking where are the texts that we could have referenced that were a sort of, that could provide some kind of harbinger of things to come. And in that way, it was very much a critique. You know, he was saying he felt like he was speaking into an emptiness when it came to literary production. And quite swiftly, we got a response from the wonderful writer Marjorie Oludhe-Magoye, who was writing on a typewriter and made us a whole list of texts that had been produced in the past that were great reference points for where we were finding ourselves at the time in 2007. So coming back to the kind of knowledge that's being produced around, you know, for people of your generation that you feel like you can reference, are there texts that you're looking at, or maybe other less visible places that you're looking at for inspiration and for information and for context about what's happened before?
So just because Shiro had mentioned that there's a Kwani with a K here and there's a Kwani with a Q here. So we usually learn a lot from the Kwani with a K. Books serve as a proper way to archive each and everything that had happened. They serve as a way to document and to share information. So even with there are a number of texts, because I usually reference Kwani 5 and Kwani 8. That's why I know everything about them. And other less visible forms of protests. Just after June, just the Monday before June 25th, there was, because most of the people had noticed, or it has become now common knowledge, that the green company along Wayakiwe is the one which is giving people out. So there has been an M-Pesa blackout Monday. Like, people have decided that every Monday people will boycott using M-Pesa. So I think boycotts are one of the strongest ways to just oppose or to just protest without it being sort of a march or a hashtag. And another means you can have is fundraising, because I remember after the last year's protest, because there were so many people who were injured, but at the time the healthcare system, of course, wasn't working. So people decided to come together and to fundraise towards helping the injured people, towards just any cause. Even this year, there is fundraising for the medics on the front line. So at least that goes to help towards mobilizing and towards pushing the cause. So I think the three main ways could be now publishing. They could be as well the boycotts, just boycotting anything. If there are any influencers or any musicians who are still on the government side, I think I've seen so many people boycotting them. And again, now the fundraising, just coming together towards a particular cause.
Thank you. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm about to say words that I never thought would come out of my mind, because they get said to me all the time. And now I'm saying them to you, which is that there's so much hope. When I listen to them, it's like all I have is hope in young people. I am also young, but I'm not this young. And I have hope in our generation, but also in yours, because there's a clarity and there's a fearlessness that I think sometimes age will erode. And it's important that even as we're getting more strategic about the way that we protest and the way that we choose to fight, that there's younger people coming to refine the old ways, not to rewrite them. Because as we can see, and I hope you all get a chance to engage with this exhibition, we have been here before in different iterations for different reasons, but it's almost like this exhibition, which we ran for the first time in December and November, December last year, reminded us that it's almost in our DNA as Kenyans, even if we don't always have to. I think I am reminded that protest is a season, but it's also a way of life. I'm going to put my mom on the spot and say that my mom lives her life fighting for things, for everything. And not because like it's easier to fight, but if that guy is going to dump trash there every single day, then I'm going to fight him until he decides to. So I think it's a very noble way to live. And I think that this season and Gen Zs have reminded me that we must go to the streets when we have to, but we must also protest every day when we can fight to make our voices, when we can fight to make something change. Then it doesn't take very much sometimes. It's a way of life. And that's a big reason why we also insisted on having this festival on this week. It's not easy to put a festival together in the midst of all of the potential risks, to fly writers into the country despite the news. But it's it's a way of life. We're going to be here for a while if we want the country, the continent, and the lives that we deserve, right? So on that note, I want to ask, you've done a lot of work looking at the past, of the history of protests, and you're involved in various forms of protests now. What do you think we're missing? What's not part of the picture? What are we not seeing?
So after the June 25th protests, I think most of the people after going home, there was a lot of reflection on Twitter, and people are wondering like, what different thing can we do to achieve just to achieve our goals. And I think one of the things that the current protest is missing is some ideological guardrails, some a roadmap to what to success, to what exactly we want to achieve. Because the thing is, when we started initially on June 18th to June 25th, at the first time the goal was just to reject the finance bill, and that was it was just a single goal. And then when the protests happened and people stormed into parliament, at least that was done. Like the finance bill at the time was rejected at the time, or at least we think so. And after that, now the movement shifted to now must go, must go. And the thing about that is that I think we have jumped so many steps, because the thing is, governments exist just to protect their survival. And so it isn't as easy to remove them just directly, like without any plan. And I think one of the things that could be implemented to achieve that, and is one of the things we discussed yesterday, is to just have just some intellectual coherence within the movement. Just to have, I think the suggestion which was brought up by Ngatia on Twitter was just to have a think tank, whereby you can have some people sit together, like look at the past. Because if you look at most of the protests that happened in the past, even with the medics, even with the teachers through NAT, when we had the likes of Ambrose Adongo, like they had what exactly they want to achieve and how exactly they plan to do them. And so if we have a think tank, if we have a study group that is able to come up with ideas on how exactly you can move forward, on what are the next steps that you should do, and have some achievable goals which will lead us now to the final goal, I think that's what the movement is missing. Because as it stands, if we decide, if maybe there's another protest coming up next week, the whole thing is that we meet in the CBD and then just march. Like there isn't any tangible goal we have with that. It's just meeting in the CBD and march. And the thing about that is that we're continuing losing life just continually. There's a lot of looting that's happening. And so there has to be a shift in what exactly we're doing going forward. I think we could attack this from different fronts. We could have those on the streets. We could have driving, maybe if it's lobbying for policy change. We could have others just providing just strategies. And so I think the most important thing that this is missing is a think tank. Yeah, strategy. Yeah.
I really love that you referenced that, because I was looking at the responses that Ngatia got on Twitter, and it was such a great reminder of, I think, the power of crowdsourcing. And a really great example I saw right after the protests last year was Chao Tayana Maina from African Digital Heritage doing the same, where she was asking people to kind of think of this moment as the archive, right? Like it's not something that's happening in the future. You're creating the archive. The archive is present. You're building it as we speak. And I think at the time, I have to check in with her and see what she collected, but she was asking people if there are things that you collected from the streets, including tear gas canisters, or like what bandana were you wearing, what T-shirts with slogans, all of these things. So that's something that's really kind of stood out to me since the protests last year, this, reject finance bill specifically. What stood out to you in the past year the most?
So the thing that stood out to me the most is how most of the people are courageous in just going all out. So the courage that's amongst most of the people going to the street is something which fascinates me the most.
Okay. Do you have any questions for Wachuka or I or the audience?
Okay, so because we have been talking a lot about research material, and so I'm just curious to know whether Book Bank is contributing towards civic action.
Yes, we received more requests for civic programs in the last year than ever before. The programs that happen here outside of this festival, there's always something happening here on the weekend, on the weekdays. And those programs are designed in response to what people coming in are telling us. and also in response to us watching how they use the space. So last year during finance bill protests, we got a lot of people coming and telling us, help us understand what's happening on the streets. Is there a book I can read to understand the finance bill? Do you have the finance bill? And since then, we've really been looking to organizations such as yourselves to see, do you need space to do what you're doing with communities? If so, come and bring your programs here. We have space. We have communities who want this material, and we know that we can't do everything. We know that we're creating the kind of infrastructure for these communications or for these conversations to happen. From a research perspective, we have one of the richest archives in the country at the Macmillan. So I think the answer to your question is yes, we are doing stuff. There's so much more we can do collaboratively because we have the infrastructure for conversation, and a lot of these challenges are around dialogue and gathering and being in communities to figure out how to build strategies, which I agree that we need. We are going to start wrapping up. And before we do, maybe Keith, is there anything you want to add before we wrap up this episode?
I just want to appreciate each and every person who goes out to the streets, each and every person who contributes in any way they can towards fighting the government, because it takes the efforts of each and every person. It doesn't take the effort of one person. It doesn't only take the effort of the person on the streets, even those who share, even those who retweet on the internet. Like all of this works towards achieving the cause. So just want each and every one of you also to clap for yourself for being here.
Yes, clap for yourselves for coming out on Sunday and sharing your voices, your thoughts, your attention, and your audience with us. We're always thinking about archives at the library. We're always thinking about the gaps. So thank you, Keith. Thank you for your work, for your voice, and for your presence here today.
Thank you as always for listening. This is A Palace for the People. I am Angela Wachuka.
And I'm Wanjiru Koinange.
If you want to find out more about Bookbank, visit our website at bookbank.org. As always, many thanks to our guests and experts for sharing their knowledge. To donate or support our work, please visit bookbank.org. This podcast is supported by the British Council's Cultural Protection Fund, administered in partnership with the UK's Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport.